What's the first thing to think about in warehousing? Safety, of course. As technology has rapidly evolved in our industry, how does safety keep up? In this live broadcasted episode, I was joined by Vinay Balan of Third Wave Automation to discuss why safety is a journey and not a destination when it comes to autonomous forklifts. Vinay dives into Third Wave's approach to automation, how safety standards and regulations are keeping up with technology, and answers a few audience questions as well. If you are wondering what safety looks like around automation, this is the episode for you.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
All right, so we are here and we are live today with a live episode of the New Warehouse Podcast. And we have a very important topic today. Looking forward to talking to Vinay Balan of Third Wave Automation, who is the product safety officer over there. And we're going to be talking about safety, of course. And safety is top of mind within the warehouse itself. And I think safety is also top of mind when it comes to robotics, autonomous. I think there's a lot of question around how safe are some of these things and how safe can they be? And just how do we go about making sure that those safety things are happening, and how can they function around those that are present in the warehouse, which are us humans, right? So we're going to dive into that topic today with Vinay, and we're going to talk a little bit about how Third Wave Automation goes about safety, why they're looking at it as a journey and not a destination in a sense, and how they're going about that journey overall, which I think is going to be a really interesting conversation. So I think we want to kick this off. Vinay, you're the product safety officer at Third Wave Automation, but you told me not to say this, but I'm going to say this. You've been involved in safety for about 20 years, right? In a sense, in your career and in various different roles and different aspects, and now with Third Wave Automation, obviously. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your background around safety and introduce us to Third Wave Automation as well for people that maybe are not so familiar.
That sounds great, Kevin. Thanks for having me, and welcome to all the other listeners. As Kevin said, I've worked in this space in the safety industry for almost 20 years. My background's actually in aeronautical engineering. I grew up wanting to fly jets, but that's a completely different episode.
Interesting.
But yeah, so I've worked in different facets of safety, and that was just by accident. I didn't grow up wanting to work with safety or robots, but so I started out in aviation, worked in semiconductor, solar industries, warehousing, obviously, and now autonomous forklifts. And as Kevin mentioned, I've had multiple roles, so it didn't always start with engineering, but because I was an engineer, I was always focused on how products were designed. But I had a background on the employee health and safety aspect that brings a different perspective when you're designing, robots and autonomous forklifts, because now you have an understanding for standards that most typical safety engineers are not necessarily looking at or are considering as they design a product. So I've worked in the Bay Area for a while, and my last stint before Third Wave was just under 9 years at Amazon, where I led a ton of robotics initiatives and deployed a lot of robotics around North America and in the EU. And now I'm at Third Wave, and it's an interesting project here because one of the things that attracted me was we're saving lives, let's put it that way, right? So forklifts have been known to be dangerous. I have been a part of some of those incidents where I've been called in to investigate. And so that was the driver for me to that we could do something, we could make a real impact in the warehousing space. And with Third Wave, just as a quick overview, so we design autonomous forklifts. We also pioneering this concept of shared autonomy. So the underlying premise is that you can probably solve 90 to 98% of the things you see in a warehouse autonomously, but every now and then you're going to have something new that happens. Maybe it's a new payload, it's a different type of pallet that shows up, and rather than the truck or the vehicle stopping and someone has to walk out to the floor, our shared autonomy system allows a remote operator to engage with that truck, solve that little problem, and then let the truck carry on its way. And part of the AI of third wave is where the truck is always learning from that remote operator and his or her interaction with the truck. So we're constantly improving the truck and its ability to deal with these unique things. And so there's these three modes you can operate the truck. You can be autonomous. The remote operator can engage when called upon. Or if you just want to move the truck to another part of the facility, you can just hop on and drive it as a manual reach truck.
Yeah, and I think the solution is very cool. I mean, I've seen it at Modex earlier this year in person and things of that nature. And, it's a great application, and certainly love the approach to, as you said, if you need to move it manually, you can jump on there as well. But I love the fact that you're kind of coming to third wave after this was a little bit of a safety mission in a sense, right? And having a passion there for, like you said, being involved in some of these incidents before, which I've seen in my career as well. And yes, I mean, forklifts can be very dangerous. So as we start to automate them, obviously we need to think about the additional safety aspects there, aside from just the regular safety aspects of forklift operation in our manual operations. And I think as we look at this transition to automation and automating some of this equipment, right? Talk to us a little bit about how are you going about that, right? The title of this talk is, it's a journey and not a destination. So tell us a little bit about what does that mean and why is it a journey? Why is it not a destination?
Yeah, that's an important piece of autonomous forklifts and robots. But before I continue, looks like we have some good interaction here. Looks like we have Darshan.
Yeah, Darshan, you have a question?
Yes. Hey, Vinay. Hey, Kevin.
Hey.
So, yes, obviously it's an interesting topic of, designing safe autonomy. So definitely like human first approach is the one of the best thing to handle the technology. And I think in your profile, Balan, I can see that mentioned also something like that. We are putting AI to work and keeping humans in the loop. So would you like to, expand on that, humanity and technology, how it goes hand in hand?
Yeah, great question. So how do we keep humans in the loop? And so this ties back to our shared autonomy platform, right? That's one aspect of it where the human is always in the loop. They have the capability to observe the fleet. They have the capability to take over. And so we have our front end system, we call it the Armada. And so we have a design operator station that you can actually manage an entire fleet and interrupt or intervene if you see the need, or as I said earlier, when the truck is requesting for help, you can actually log in, and we have a suite of cameras that the remote operator has access to. They have access to all our LiDAR information to understand exactly what's happening around them, right? And so that's on the remote operator piece. The other aspect where we keep the human in the loop is by our HMI, a human machine interface interaction designs, right? So with the lighting and state lighting to ensure anyone working around our truck understands what this truck is about to do or where it's going. Darshan, did that answer your question?
Yes, indeed, Vinay. Basically, I'm coming forward from the philosophy and psychology angle of handling humans. Yes, obviously, technology can keep humans in the loop, but what else is required on top of that? Regular training, drivers, morale boost up, and all that. If it is in scope, you can expand on that also.
So I think, and this is part of what we were considering as like a follow-on, based on the feedback we got from this event. But let me touch upon a little bit. So one of the myths of introducing robotics in warehouses is everyone is fearful of they're not, if they haven't worked around automation, they have no idea what a robot or a 2-ton truck is going to do, right? There's another aspect of there is an efficiency play, so which means there's going to be some cost reductions and people may lose their jobs. But I think the intention of automation is to kind of repurpose your resources, not necessarily replace them. So from a third wave aspect, we've had customers who are driving manual forklifts that come up to our operators and say, hey, I want that job. I want to be sitting in an office observing multiple trucks versus riding along in this bumpy cabin for 8 hours, right? So to answer your question, Darshan, there is an education/training component when it comes to deploying autonomy in warehouses and making people aware of, as easy as, why are we doing this, right? How does it help the individual on the warehouse floor? How does it impact the company? And then having sufficient training, partnering with your automation provider on training the workforce on the safety features of the truck, what they should expect. Because in my experience, what I've seen is, once people are comfortable knowing that this autonomous robot, or even back in the day when it was industrial robots or AGVs, once they understand the thought that has gone into ensuring that the product is safe and that they are out of harm's way, and that they have some very simple procedures or behaviors that they would need to implement, then they become champions for the automation. They become champions. But when you don't have that level of transparency with the workforce, it's sometimes adoption then sometimes becomes just an uphill battle. So yes, so regular training at the onset of deployment. What we do at Third Wave is, I just did this last week at a company, at one of our customers in Chicago. I had their entire operations team, all their managers from all the shifts show up, and I love to show them, like, no PowerPoint slides. I just show them the truck and I say, let's go test the truck. Give me all your use cases. Let's see what the truck does. And once they start seeing the truck in action, and it's actually like, oh wow, it stops for this, and it tells me when it's going to do that. Now you're building that confidence in the leadership team, and so they are able to now transfer that confidence and that information into the workforce. And then you just work with the customers, because a lot of these customers may not have automation. So you act as an advisor or a consultant, and you help them put in place the necessary policies at their sites, and just hold their hand until they get a little comfortable. And for the most part, I've seen where after a safety briefing with the leaderships and the workforce, and just as they work around autonomy in all aspects, not just Third Wave, people tend to get a lot more comfortable and become champions.
Interesting. Yeah. I love that hands-on approach. I mean, I think that's really makes a lot of sense. You said, in comparison to a PowerPoint, right, or a video or something like that. I mean, going out there and really getting hands-on, especially something that's, fairly new to most people that may be out there working in a warehouse environment, right? I mean, the penetration overall for automation is still pretty new, still pretty low. So when you start to bring these things in, a lot of times it's the first time that some of these employees maybe are around it, or these managers, as you said, may have experience with automation in a sense. So I think it's very interesting. And I think it's great too that you said, there's certainly employees that look at it and say like, oh, I'd rather be, sitting at a desk and controlling these forklifts than standing on them all day long, right? I mean, I think, if we think back 10 years ago, a forklift operator, if you told them they could have a desk job, they would probably laugh at you, right? So I think that's very interesting. So, I mean, I guess tell us a little bit about kind of this safety journey in a sense, right? As you guys are building up this autonomous vehicle and putting it out there. I mean, what is the journey in a sense in that process as you're developing as well?
Yeah, that's I'll get back to that question in terms of so why is it a journey? I think folks are probably wondering, like, why do I say it's not a destination and it's a journey? So back in the day, when you talked about industrial robots or even AGVs that had a very defined path in the warehouse, it was relatively easy to understand the use case, predict what the known interactions would be, implement the necessary safety functions, and then get the right hardware, the right sensors, and approach certification and deploy, right? Because a lot of those variables were in some sense very fixed. When you think about autonomy, now we are talking about a robot that is free to traverse through the warehouse. Obviously there's some limitations based on the mapping and where it's allowed to go and not, but it's going to do things that you can't predict. So when you think about a risk assessment, which is like step number 1 in all of this product design for safety, there's a handful of things that you can come up with based on industry standards, based on knowing how things operate, and sometimes it's the experience of the individuals in the room. But there's a lot of unknowns. You can't predict how a warehouse, the layout's going to be, how humans are going to interact, to Darshan's earlier question, right? What are they going to do? And then as you're thinking about all of this, you also want to ensure that, whatever you deploy is efficient, right? So safety is paramount, but the product also needs to work. And so you start thinking about, okay, what technologies do I need to have on this product to enable all of these things, right? So I'll give you an example. The company chose to use 3D LiDARs. And as most of you know, the industry standard for a very long time, and I think the standards are only now catching up, was based on technology that was there in the past. And those were 2D LiDARs, and they still work great. But when you think about all the things you can experience in the warehouse, right, having a 3D and a 360-degree view of your environment helps you make those decisions a lot more smarter, right? The example we have is if we started out with the traditional see something, stop, and wait for it to move out of the way, call the remote operator. But then we realized that we have to behave differently around humans and forklifts, because a 2-ton truck cannot come right up to a human and stop like a few inches away from him. It's okay if that's a pallet, but not for a human. And so things we have done differently is where we still have our core safety stack that will still stop for everything. But then now we talk about machine learning and train models. And so we trained a model that actually detects and classifies humans and other forklifts. And then now that we have this information, because of the technology we were willing to go with, we're able to now behave differently around humans and other forklifts. And that, again, going back to the first question that we had, it puts the bystanders and the other operators at ease when they see that this forklift is actually very predictable and it knows I'm there and it's going to do something about it, versus keep coming at me till either I move out of the way or till I get into its stopping zone, right?
Yeah, almost like playing chicken.
Yeah. So that's why it's a journey, right? It's like you don't know everything right off the bat. So with autonomy, it's more of, the risks, you're mitigating a core set of safety functions, you're implementing it, and you're verifying it. You're doing a lot of testing. You use simulation. You use in your R&D lab. In our R&D lab, we do a ton of testing. I have a whole Google Drive folder of test plans, right? And we run these tests in simulation every night to check the software. We run them at periodic intervals on our trucks when they come off the line. And then when we deploy to customers, I can tell you for the first couple of years, we had a safety stopper, someone that walked behind the truck about 10 or 20 feet with a wireless safety stop, because we had not still verified that the things that we implemented were actually going to work. And so then eventually that's the process where you verify, you get enough hours on the truck on those functions, you understand use cases, and you get to a point where you are able to develop confidence in the product. And that's what we did earlier this year rather, is where we were able to put on like thousands of hours on this truck incident free. So where the safety stopper didn't have to hit the button, to then, put an argument together of why we no longer need a safety stopper, because our core set of functions achieves some minimum level of safety that is going to, protect people and product in the facility. Are we done yet? No, we still have new use cases that come up all the time. And so the reason it's a journey is it allows you the flexibility to keep learning to a certain point, but you're actually getting your safety system to be as smart and as safe as you can before you have to lock everything down to go certified. And the same thing is happening in the supplier space, right? 3D sensor vendors, they started out in the same path. Now all of them are now transitioning because of another industry that is pushing for this, which is the automotive industry. That now they are also at a point where they have enough data, they have enough customers, they have enough use cases to where they are starting down that path of getting certified. So very soon you're going to see a lot of these newer technologies getting adopted faster. But at the same time, I wouldn't say you have to wait for it to be certified. You just have to get the right safety mechanisms in place to detect when things can go wrong and then stop the vehicle. And that's what we do. We have a ton of safety mechanisms in our software that actually detect if any sensor is not reporting or it goes out, and it will bring the truck to a stop and call our remote operator.
Interesting. Yeah, and I definitely see, why is it a journey now instead of just a destination, because you're continuously kind of evolving in it. As you said, they're getting more, use cases as you go about further testing and getting more hours on the truck and things of that nature. So it makes total sense. So so Drew has been patiently waiting here to chime in. So Drew, you got a question?
Yes, thanks for the explanation there, Vinay. It's great to hear that you have moved on from the wireless e-stop follower from earlier this year. That's fantastic. The question I had was about not the autonomous safety, since we're talking about safety. It's what's the safety put in place when the remote operator takes over in order to ensure that the system is safe. That was my curiosity.
Yeah, that's a great question, Drew. So I can tell you early on, we were still developing the safety system. So that's why we had the safety stopper. But once we knew the safety algorithms and our approach to how to react and respond to people and obstacles in the warehouse was validated, we then just use the same system even when the remote operator is operating. So if someone's remotely operating our truck, all our obstacle detection and collision systems are enabled, and we call that collision shield. So even if the operator was, let's call this horseplay and trying to drive the truck towards a rack or another forklift, our obstacle detection system will kick in and stop the truck and disable the remote operator. Now they do have the chance, because we had to allow for this when it comes to pallet manipulation in the racks, where you have to get really close to the racks and we have to, sometimes shift pallets up, down, or left and right. And so in that case, we do have another feature where they're allowed to disable that obstacle detection system, but we then restrict what the remote operator can do. So we restrict the speed to 0.5 meters per second. We restrict other movements of the truck so that they're still within safe limits of limiting any damage that could occur. And did that help, Drew? Did that answer your question?
Yes, that did. That's what I was hoping you would say as far as the remote operator being protected. And then I think in the event that the system gets completely stuck, a forklift gets stuck, then you do have the ability that's unique, I think, to your forklifts, that someone can still go out there and hop on it and move it out of the way physically, right?
That is correct. And so we have safety mechanisms built into where should an operator, certified forklift operator, choose to hop onto the truck, we then disconnect the autonomy computer. So someone else couldn't show up at the operator station and say, oh, let's go do this today. We completely disconnect the autonomy system from the truck when someone steps in. And then the other aspect of remote operation is where, because it's, you're relying on network and Wi-Fi, we monitor that. And so if we detect a lag, we start letting the operator know. And if that lag persists for a specific amount of time, we again disable the remote operations and then wait for the Wi-Fi routers to, find another AP in the facility and reconnect.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you, Drew, for that. Let's see, we got somebody else here. We're going to bring up Kwabina.
I know this guy.
Hey, Vinay, and
Hey,
thank
Kobe.
you, Kevin.
Welcome.
Great discussion thus far. Vinay, I'm curious. First of all, by way of introduction, I lead Quantized Fulfillment Technologies. We provide functional safety regulatory compliance consulting for the robotics and supply chain industry. My question, Vinay, is regarding the workflow to develop a safety case for and the deliverables associated with that for certification. What are you seeing from the perspective of leveraging AI to accelerate this workflow from your vantage point?
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Do you want more warehouse content delivered to your inbox? Sign up for our new email series called Warehouse Wisdom Wednesday to get an educational series of emails on warehouse basics delivered directly to you every Wednesday morning. Find the sign up link in the show notes.
Yeah, that's a great question. The frameworks, so there are some frameworks that have been made available to the autonomous vehicle industry. Namely, there's the UL 4600, there's the SOTIF standard, which is the 21448, safety of the intended function. And a lot of these standards offer guidance in terms of what should you consider when trying to put this case together. There's also a new draft standard in the EU, and I can't get the number in my head right now, but where they're actually specifically targeting, the use of AI for safety, right? And what are the guardrails? One of the things we do at Third Wave as we explore this uncharted territory is we are documenting and adding controls, right? So when you think about machine learning and learned models, what guardrails do you have to ensure the quality of the training content that is going into this model, right? Can we trace back in terms of, okay, how we trained this model? What did we use to train the model? Is the model actually giving us the right results, right? And so we have a lot of checks and balances and reporting on these items. And I think it is key for anyone in this space to constantly, be aware of how things are evolving, but also having sufficient capabilities to report internally, to understand all the different use cases, what's changing, having that change management set up, and then documenting the different use cases in a format that where you can now argue, or rather provide an argument for why you believe what you've implemented is safe. And that is a combination of the traditional practices of risk assessments and functional safety, and then you layer that on top with here are the use cases that fall outside the realm of the traditional safety standards, and this is how we have approached ensuring that these models and these decisions that the algorithms are making are safe enough. And so there is no metric that says how safe is safe enough, but I think if you can demonstrate the ability that you have control over your processes and what you've put into your system, the feedback I have got from regulators and assessors is that that's good enough. It's not the best because there's no standard, but that's good enough because that shows good intent and shows that you're actually following a process and you have good control over that process to try your best to make the end result as deterministic as possible, right? It's still a very probabilistic environment when you think about AI and algorithms. So yeah, demonstrating that rigor in the process is something I would recommend, and it's something we do at Third Wave as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kobe. Good to hear from you.
All right. Yep. Thank you for the question. So Vinay, I have a question for you. I'm curious. I mean, you're talking about some of the regulations and things like that, and I know you're involved in some of the standards setting in the industry and things of that nature. And it's actually a conversation I was having yesterday with somebody, and in some aspects we see technology progressing so quickly and faster than some of the standards can keep up with. So how do you kind of navigate that? And do you sometimes find that maybe there's some restrictions around the standards not being up to where the technology is, and that becomes a little challenging to push forward and evolve more? Or what's your position on that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'll be honest with you. But before I answer that question, just because I mentioned it, the
Sure.
AI safety standard that I mentioned earlier is the ISO 5469. It's in draft right now. There's a draft that was released earlier this year, so I think you can get a copy of that online to at least get a sense for where this is heading. In terms of the standards keeping up, yeah, that's a tough one, and I can use an example. So in the US, the applicable standard for Third Wave's product is the ANSI B56.5, which was the AGV standard, which is now being I won't say reworded, but we're just making sure that the wording also could be made applicable to autonomous trucks, right? And I'm on this committee, and part of the challenges we had is, so when you go out to have to demonstrate that you comply with this standard is an older standard, and so it still references, or at least made its test plans and test objects based on the technology that was available when the standard was written, which was 2D LiDARs. And so the test objects are these small black cylinders. There's two variations. One represents the ankle of a human being and one represents the torso, right? This is the challenge we have seen, and this is what we're trying to change, is when you think about 3D LiDARs, I can see the entire human, right? And I do not need to focus on just the ankle. But because that's the standard, we had to, when we have to demonstrate compliance to these test objects, we have to derate our 360 field of view lidars to focus 180 degrees, so that we can send a more intense, we can focus the power of the beams towards the floor to see this small little object that represents the ankle, when in reality we can see the entire human. We don't need to just see the ankle. So that's one example, right, of
Yeah.
where standards may be lagging. And so how we deal with it, again, it comes back to sessions like these. You're listening to other folks, what are they doing, you're networking, and you're trying to understand uh, how do you build your product knowing that the standards are going to catch up, right? I don't think standards lag intentionally. It's just the revision cycles are like 3 years apart or 4 years apart, and technology changes every week, right? So you want to try and build that product to know that you still understand the intent of the standard. You're not going to violate the standard. And then you want to use forums, there's conferences, you can be on the committees, and you start having these discussions and helping inform people about how there's different technology, and you're trying to bring that standard up to par. Like the robotics side of the house, the A3 organization actually is moving in that direction. They have started to evolve their standards to actually include all these different sensing modalities, right? Radars, lidars, cameras, because not one sensor is going to solve everything, right? So did that answer the question, Kevin?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's certainly something that's, it's an interesting discussion and a thought, because, it is kind of, in a sense, standards sometimes take a little while to update, right, and get that approval overall. But we see in our industry, especially, which I think is one of the coolest things about our industry, is that the technology is just evolving so rapidly and so quickly. But I think it's an interesting example you gave, where you have the ability to see the entire human, right, and through the 3D and the 360, but you had to kind of like dial it back, in a sense, to be able to meet that standard. So I think it's an interesting kind of intersection of, where does the standards catch up to the technology, almost, in a sense. So very, very interesting there. So thank you for that. So very interesting discussion here, definitely. And we'll go to the audience one more time here to see if anybody else has questions, or maybe we'll pose a question to the audience here. I know, Vinay, you had a couple questions maybe you wanted to ask the audience.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for those who are listening, I'm curious. We wanted to make this as interactive as we could. So, I was wondering if any of you have worked, in this space with autonomous robots or maybe even vehicles, and what are the challenges that you've encountered as you have designed and deployed some of these technologies?
Drew, coming back up here. Hey, Drew.
Yeah, great question, Vinay. I'm working around the AMRs, mostly the pallet and shelf moving ones, quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Familiar with your forklift style ones as well, but the safety is definitely a major challenge that are trying to figure out, and a lot of it comes down to they use the 2D lidar. I know you were mentioning the 3D one, so are the 3D lidar sensors actually being certified as safe? Not, I mean, like manufacturers that are actually providing the 3D lidars that could be starting to get used in all of the AMRs that are, the non-forklift ones. Are you seeing ones that are out there that are actually certified?
There are, I know one that is already certified to ASIL B, which is the automotive standard, which is comparable to a SIL 2 or a performance level D. And I know if there's other functional safety folks listening, that we can have a longer discussion around that, what that
Nice.
comparison means. And yes, there are quite a few of the suppliers that are moving towards, or at least, when I shouldn't say moving, have already started that journey of certification. And it goes back to the piece of, when you certify, you are confident that your product offers the value that your customer wants, and that there is enough in there to start locking down, like the hardware, the chips on the board, the firmware, because once you certify it, changing any of that is not a very straightforward process. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I expect it to be more readily available in the coming years. There's other different types of lidar. So you have spinning lidars, I think solid state, there's a discussion around solid state lidars coming up and bringing the overall cost, because they are slightly pricier than the 2D lidars as well. So yeah, just like any other technology, I think the industry is moving forward. The automotive industry is driving this need for these sensors to get certified, but we are reaping the benefits of that industry and saying, great, we could use the same.
Are there particular stamps that we need to look for? Because I mean, I've typically in the past with safety programming for machinery was looking for things to be TUV certified, but the AMR industry is a completely different area. So are there particular stamps that we could rely on to say, hey, this sensor has been certified to be, as you said, PLD classification?
Yeah, so typically you would go through, so there's a couple of standards when you think about a sensor, right? So most sensors have some end product standard out there. So an end product standard is a standard that is applicable to cameras or applicable to lidars or radars, right? One of the things on lidars is laser safety, and so you're looking for certification as what class of laser did it get certified to. That's the ISO 60825-1. So that gives you the different classes of lasers based on the beam strength, and so you definitely want to see that from your vendor, right? There's FCC pieces depending on how your system is configured, that you want to make sure it complies with the part 15 class A. And then on the functional safety, which was the performance level D that I mentioned, that's the certification that you get to when both the hardware and the firmware has gone through the entire cert process for functional safety specifically. And in that realm, you're looking for any of the known assessors. You have TUV, you have UL, you have Intertech, and you have a lot of these folks that offer that assessment and certification.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Drew. And looks like we had another question here from Go Cool.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Vinay.
Hey,
Good to connect here in this context. So I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts. As you know, the automotive industry well. I think the challenge with AVs in the passenger car space has been like the statistical argument for when we are safe enough. You sort of briefly pointed to standards being there. On the warehouse side, with the type of autonomous robotics you're working with, do you expect faster convergence or alignment on what is safe enough, or not? Maybe interested in hearing your thoughts on how this particular industry is approaching, like, when are we done question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's two aspects to it, Gokul, and as you know this already, there's two aspects. So the warehouse is relatively more constrained space, but it still has its own share of unknowns, right? And the concept of safe autonomy is still relatively new to the warehousing space. So one approach that I've seen people take, I won't comment if that's a good approach or not, but is they default back to your basic safety system that have been implemented for many years, and they kind of call it done at that point. But what I've seen in my experience is at that point, that product is not very valuable to the customer, right? It stops for everything. It's always thinking. It doesn't make the decisions you want it to make to get your return on investment. And so I have, as you're familiar, so Gokul is one of the folks that actually introduced me to the sort of standard, just for the record. Okay. So I've actually incorporated the principles of SOTIF as we were trying to remove our safety stopper, right? So if you look at the safety SOTIF, it gives you a framework for, how could you put in how can you calculate based on the risk and based on the environment, the number of hours that you need to demonstrate to show that, you have some level of safety on this truck. And I think I expect that to be a lot quicker in the warehousing industry, only because it's not as complex as the AV space, where you have so many more millions of unknowns and human interactions that you have to figure out. So that's my hope. That and as third wave, one of the things I am excited about is leading from the front and kind of helping our customers as well as the standards committees understand that these are other approaches that other industries are taking, and how do we bring that same emphasis into this space? Because at the end of the day, there's the safety system and there's the autonomy system. And I think the AV industry had it right, a few years back, which is you can have an underlying safety system, but even your autonomy has to be safe enough. You cannot make random, unpredictable decisions just because you're now an autonomous vehicle and you can pick and choose your own paths and behave as intended. So you have to demonstrate some level of safe autonomy in the warehousing. I expect it to converge faster in the warehousing space compared to the AV space.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for that question. Vinay, why don't you tell us a little bit about, I guess, we're going to be continuing this conversation, I think, in about 2 weeks, right? So you want to tell us a little bit about that and tell us where people can learn more about third wave automation?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say thank you for the questions. This was an experiment, so our marketing guy was like, hey, Vinay, we got to,
shout out
talk
Tolgar.
about safety. Tolgar, exactly. And, he was like, let's do a webinar. And honestly, no hard feelings here, but sometimes webinars are great, but, you have questions that are not covered and you're like, why did I just spend 45 minutes on this webinar? And so we talked about it and we said, hey, can we have an interactive session with the audience, understand what their questions are like, and then tailor the content of the webinar so that we're actually hearing from the audience, the listeners in this space, and then craft that webinar. So that's coming up later, probably in a month or so. But yeah, in 2 weeks, where we wanted to go with this. So today's topic was just kind of laying that, hey, this is not a straight path when you think about autonomous robots, right? There's a lot of factors to consider. And the question that was asked at the start of this Q&A session from Darshan is kind of where we want to take this conversation next, is try and understand, talk a little more about and understand from folks, what are they seeing, right? What do customers need to do? If you're a customer and either you made the decision or your management has made the decision to introduce automation into your facilities, how do you prep for that, right? What role does the customer play in the deployment of autonomous technology, and how do they make it successful for their own purposes and safe? So that's kind of where we want to go in 2 weeks. So I look forward to more questions on that topic.
All right, great. And we'll definitely be looking forward to that event in 2 weeks. And what's the website? Third Wave Automation. Where can people go to find out more?
It was my pleasure. Yeah, you could go to thirdwave.ai to learn more about Third Wave. And the next event is audio event that we're going to have is on October 10th. You should see, a post, and then you can join to attend that event. And Kevin, it was great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. Thank you to all the listeners. Some amazing questions. You had me thinking there for a while and thinking about, why did I sign up to do this? So, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. I hope it was valuable. I think that was my biggest, objective, is that I hope I added some value into what you're thinking about when you think about autonomous forklifts. If I answered your questions well. And, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect and reach out. I'll be happy to share and also learn from what all of you are going through and how we can move this industry forward in the right way.
All right, fantastic. And thank you for that, Vinay. And I think you certainly proved your expertise here. I was very impressed when you started throwing out all the different certification and regulation numbers and all that stuff. So looking forward to the next conversation, as you mentioned, on October 10th. So wishing everybody a good rest of the week. And thank you once again to Vinay for joining me. And thank you to everybody that chimed in with questions and listened as well. Enjoyed this episode? We are continuing the conversation with Vinay on October 10th, live on LinkedIn, where we will be discussing why safety matters when deploying autonomous trucks in your operation. Have your own thoughts or questions? Bring them to this interactive session. Link to the event is in the show notes. Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.